AP 120, Chapter 16, topics alveolar gas exchange. So, gas exchange does not occur in the bronchial tree. It does not occur in the trachea. It does not occur in the larynx. No, you have to go deep into the lungs, down to the alveoli, these little pockets, thin suprasquamous tissue that are adjacent to blood capillaries, pulmonary capillaries, to get the gas exchange process to occur. Um, so again, the alveoli are tiny little sacs that are clustered in structures called alveolar sacs that are at the end of alveolar ducts. And they are super thin. They are simple squamous epithelial tissue. So look how super thin that is. And all that space is where the air will be. So the exchange of gases occurs between the pulmonary capillaries, the blood capillaries, and the alveoli. So you have the simple squamous cells of the alveolus adjacent to the simple squamous cells of the capillary, blood capillary. Matter of fact, they're so close together, they actually share a basement membrane. So this is about as thin as you can possibly get. And then this allows the gases to move from the air in the lungs to the blood in the bloodstream. So gases are going to move from areas of high pressure to low pressure. Think of pressure as the same way as concentration. So it's going to move from high to low. So for instance, oxygen, the oxygen in the air that we breathe in is a much higher pressure than the oxygen in the bloodstream, so 104 to 40. So oxygen will diffuse from high concentration in the air in the alveolus across the respiratory membrane into the bloodstream. Again, this is external respiration. Carbon dioxide will go the other direction. Carbon dioxide, the pressure is higher in the bloodstream than in the air in the alveoli. So carbon dioxide will move from the bloodstream across the respiratory membrane into the alveoli. Again, the difference isn't as great, so less carbon dioxide is moving, but it still is leaving the bloodstream. And there are various factors that are favoring this diffusion. There is huge surface area inside the lungs between the capillaries and the alveoli, very thin, very short distance. These gases are very soluble, so they can move in fluids and as well as in air. And of course, the steeper the gradient, the steeper the difference between concentrations, the quicker it will occur. So oxygen moves more efficiently, more rapidly than carbon dioxide does, because it has a steeper gradient. 104 to 40 is much, much greater than 45 to 40. All right, oxygen is then transported throughout the body in the red blood cells. So 98% of the oxygen is carried on hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells. The remaining 2% or so is dissolved in plasma. So here's a question, a reminder. What are blood cells known as? I hope you said erythrocytes. I hope you did. All right, so when the red blood cells arrive in our tissues, the oxygen levels in the tissues are much lower than in the bloodstream. So again, oxygen is going to move from high concentration in the bloodstream to low concentration in the tissues and eventually cells of the body. And then, of course, our carbon dioxide is also going to move from the tissues back into the bloodstream. And as you release carbon dioxide, oxygen, this will affect the relative amount of carbon dioxide, which will affect the acidity of blood. And that can increase the amount of oxygen being moved. So the more acidic the blood is, the more oxygen that will move. And also blood temperatures. The warmer the temperature is, the more oxygen that will move. But the main thing that affects the movement of oxygen is oxygen levels. So higher in the blood than in the tissues, so the oxygen leaves the bloodstream and enters the tissues. Of course, we can have problems where this isn't occurring effectively. So hypoxia is a deficiency in oxygen in the tissues. It can be caused by a lot of different things. Basically, for whatever reason, blood flow or at least oxygen levels aren't reaching different portions of the body, causing those tissues to be deficient in oxygen. And if this occurs in enough parts of the body, it can lead to all kinds of side effects, such as cyanosis, the extremities turning bluish, shortness of breathing, rapid heart rate, tachycardia, and even someone falling unconscious. All right, carbon dioxide transport. Also important because we know it affects the blood pH. So, carbon dioxide is produced by the cells of our body, then it leaves and enters the fluid surrounding the tissues, and then it will enter the bloodstream. So, carbon dioxide transport initiates by going into the bloodstream, into the capillaries in our tissues. This would be internal respiration. So, 7% of carbon dioxide is carried in the blood plasma. 23% is actually carried by hemoglobin, binds to a different site on hemoglobin than oxygen does. That counts for 30, but the remaining 70% gets converted into bicarbonate. So the carbon dioxide enters the bloodstream, reacts with water to form carbonic acid, which then splits into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. These hydrogen ions will lower blood pH, will make the pH of blood more acidic. So again, carbon dioxide will react with water to become carbonic acid that then breaks down into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. And it's the hydrogen ions that will cause the blood pH to lower and become more acidic. So, of course, then as the carbon dioxide reaches the lungs and the carbon dioxide leaves the bloodstream to enter the airspace in the lungs, as carbon dioxide is leaving, this pushes the chemical reaction to go in the opposite direction so that the bicarbonate reforms into carbonic acid, which then once more breaks down into carbon dioxide and water, and the carbon dioxide continues to leave the bloodstream and entering the air of the lungs. And this will raise blood pH, will make the pH more alkaline or basic. And of course, the hemoglobin will also release carbon dioxide. So in our tissues, blood is slightly more acidic, and in our lungs, the blood is slightly more alkaline or basic. So gases transport oxygen primarily by hemoglobin, and carbon dioxide primarily in the form of bicarbonate ions. And that is it for chapter 16.